Want that. So this is where we left off in class on Wednesday. So methamphetamine, of course, it's a wild drug. It's highly addictive. It makes your face melt, among other things. And it works because it works just like a neurotransmitter. So it decreases the dopamine receptors, so you need more and more stimulation for the same effect. A lot of meth users also end up kind of paranoid schizophrenic. So drugs that alter behavior do so by altering neurotransmitter signaling. A lot of these kinds of drugs can actually be used to treat disorders like depression, ADHD, schizophrenia, to a certain extent. Both legal and illegal drugs can act on the same neurotransmitters, but the exact mechanism or dynamics are different. So dopamine, Ritalin, cocaine, meth, serotonin, LSD, all the kind of psychedelic drugs. Also Prozac effects or things like that. Addiction has to do with the nature and timing of the drug's action, fast-acting, short duration. We're going to change topics a little bit. I'm going to talk about parasites. We've been exposed to parasites before. We've talked about malaria, a number of other ones, parasites, rabies. Parasites, of course, what they do is they use the tissues of a host to survive and reproduce, and then complete their life cycle, because it usually goes in a number of stages, like malaria with, it goes from one mammalian host, usually a human, or it could be another kind of malaria goes for birds, that sort of stuff. Then is bitten by a mosquito. It goes into another form. It then goes and bites another person and injects the parasite into that person. Okay. It turns out, obviously, transmission from one host to the next is really important. And a lot of parasites actually control the nervous systems of a lot of different hosts. It's been well documented in mollusks and insects and mammals and birds and all sorts of different things where the parasite actually affects how animals behave. And we'll see this if you go to this little thing on this fungi or fungus that attacks ants, bullet ants in Central and South America, and it actually infects their brain and causes them to eventually climb to the highest point they can, to lock on. Then they die, but in the meantime, a fruiting body comes out and spreads the spores over where the colony was, and a lot of the other ants get infected too, and so it enhances the transmission rate. And you can see the same thing with like rabies and mammals that are infected by rabies. It infects their behavior, it makes them want to bite and chew and all kinds of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of other ones you can look up. There's just a myriad number. And we're going to talk about another one later after this. So I want you to watch this thing on the ants. It's pretty amazing and pretty crazy. So the other parasite we're going to talk about is Toxoplasma gondii. It's a single-cell eukaryote. It can reproduce asexually and sexually. And it has a specific transmission cycle. So if you go into lecture files and under media, you'll see toxoplasmosis transmission cycle. And there's a number of other ones. There's an 8-minute one that you can see with a little bit more detail and stuff like that. But it basically infects mammals. And its primary host is actually a cat. And the cat is where it actually reproduces sexually. But in all the other ones, it can reproduce asexually. And it usually can infect the brain. So you can see that what happens is it affects the way, and the main, obviously, prey of a cat is a rodent of some sort, so a mouse. And it actually makes the rodent, instead of averse to hanging out with cats, to run away and hide and all that, well, it does the opposite. It actually makes the cat appear sexually arousing to a mouse, and you can imagine what happens then. Now, so part of the life cycle is an animal, let's say a mouse or something, comes in contact with cat feces. They can become infected with T. gondii. It's a fairly common soil eukaryote. And in many cases, the infection isn't serious, but however, it can change the behavior of an intermediate host, not the cat, but let's say some prey animal like these 2 mice or rats. So it turns out that rodents that are that have been infected with T. gondii are attracted to cat odors and also have much slowed reaction times. In other words, a lot of them actually want to mate with a cat. So they hang out with cats, and this is what happens. They become one with the cat after the cat's eaten. And once it infects, it's in the gondii, T. gondii toxo is in the mouse. So it does this. It actually affects dopamine signaling to actually affect how the mouse behaves. In fact, it carries the genes that required to synthesize dopamine. So the parasite can actually release extra dopamine. It can infect mammalian neurons, increase dopamine levels, and it also enhances sexual attraction pathway in mice, causing the smell of a cat urine to act as an aphrodisiac. And you can see what dopamine kind of looks like and what it actually, a dopamine analog looks like. Now, as you know, it actually affects the brain of rodents and other intermediate hosts. And you wonder, well, how does it get there? There's a blood-brain barrier. It actually has traits that allow it to travel through our cells, not just between them, and infect the brain and get into the brain. Now, and of course, once it's in the cat eats the mouse, the cat releases the Gondii in its feces, and this life cycle. Now, it can also infect all kinds of other mammals. It can affect cattle. They can pick it up as well. They can infect pigs. It can infect almost everything. Okay. In general, with humans, it's only serious in terms of a fetus. So, if a mother gets infected and passes on to her fetus, the child is in serious straits and can suffer extensive birth defects and all that. So it's really bad. Mothers have to stay away, like from cat feces, so they get husbands or boyfriends that change the litter box if they have any cats. Okay, so and we can also get toxo from eating infected animals and that sort of thing. Now the thing is, it was thought for the most part that it doesn't T. gondii doesn't affect our behavior or the behavior of cattle or anything like that, even though it does mice. But so what? Obviously, a cat's not going to eat a cow unless a tiger got, perhaps that. But anyway, it's not going to happen. But it turns out that gondii, the parasite at a certain stage, can get into our brains, and then our immune system kicks in, and it insists or covers, makes a barrier around the parasite so it can't do any more. At least that's what was thought. But it turns out that sometimes you can get a situation where the parasites are released and they start asexually reproducing. Okay, now we can really see this often in immunocompromised like AIDS patients. One of the major secondary infections is toxoplasmosis, and they get it in their brain, so they've already been infected. Their immune system usually controls it, but they're immunocompromised, and so it starts causing real serious neural tissue damage. Okay, but it also looks like there might be other things that at times make our immune system not work as well as it can. And it also seems like it might actually affect our behavior. So in humans, there's some gender-specific effects. Now this is all correlative, and we're not going to exactly go in and do experiments where we infect the minds of various humans, but we've done it in other animals and rodents, obviously, so we kind of know what the pathways are. And in general, it seems like it makes men more jealous, stubborn, rule-defiant. Well, that's about normal, isn't it? So I don't know how that's much different. But there was a retrospective study looking at that men are infected with toxo are more likely to get into traffic accidents due to road rage or something like that. Apparently in women, it makes them more warm, outgoing, more realistic. So obviously this is correlative, but there is some evidence that it really does affect behavior. So what are some of the hypotheses that might explain these kinds of correlations? Like, how would you take these correlations and do an actual experiment that tests the hypothesis that T. gondii can affect our behavior? So here's the hypothesis. Obviously, we have ethical rules. Too bad. But we could take two groups of humans with a mix of men and women. Let's say we want a large group, a large sample size, 1,000 in each group. Infect the treatment group with toxo and have the other group as control. In other words, no infection. probably follow them for, let's say, 5 years. And hypothesis is that, of course, T. gondii causes behavioral changes in human hosts. And then the prediction would be, let's say, T. gondii will cause an increase in the number of traffic accidents, sexual partners, drug use in the treatment group compared to the control group. You can measure some other things too, and you can also add a variable control for sex as well. And then see what happens. So 20% of the U.S. population is believed to be infected with T. gondii. In some parts of the world, it's probably 50%. It's hard to know. So if you're, let's say I'm infected with T. gondii and I start acting strange, and I get into a road rage incident, and I trash someone's car, and then I start assaulting people, and then I gamble too much and all that. Do you think that I am still responsible for my actions? And of course, you already know that obviously I'm not responsible for my actions, because you've already seen me for a whole semester, and this is the way I am. Now, it turns out also there is a correlation between schizophrenia and T. gondii. And that some people show a lot of the symptoms of schizophrenia, like auditory hallucinations, paranoid delusions, disorganized speech and thinking, all that kind of stuff. Now, for most people, it's usually found in adolescence, late adolescence, early adulthood, and usually once there's kind of a psychotic break, the individual has schizophrenia, and they try to do things with drugs, but it's not all that successful. It's pretty brutal. Now, contributing factors and genetic environmental influences. So no one knows exactly what causes schizophrenia, by the way. There might be a number of different independent causes. But if one of the causes might actually be T. gondii infection and schizophrenia, there seems to be a positive correlation between people who are infected and people who then go on to develop schizophrenia. And obviously, now if it happens in adolescence, it's confounded. But if you start seeing a kind of schizophrenic behavior show up in populations that become infected later in life, then you might have some reason to believe perhaps that this is what's going on. So, men infected by T. gondii are 6 times more likely to be in traffic accidents than uninfected men. Well, we've already discussed the hypothesis and what might be causing it. Now, of course, I think men are probably in more traffic accidents than women anyway. But you'd expect, in terms of 2 different groups, that one had T. gondii and one didn't, that you'd find the men who were infected like that had more traffic accidents compared to the women, or to each other, the two groups, or maybe the women do too compared to each other, the toxo group and the non-toxo group. So, remember about correlation. T. gondii will say that causes risk-taking behavior, or perhaps some risky behavior can lead to T. gondii infection. That seems more unlikely. There's some other videos that you can look at on this kind of parasitic stuff. Pretty interesting. Anyway, that'll do it for this last lecture.